The Wagner Group boss to leave Russia for Belarus after halting his fighters' advance on Moscow. An average 2.3% increase in MTR fares takes effect. And Cathay Pacific to recruit 200 to 300 flight attendants from the mainland this year. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The leader of the Wagner private military group has given up an armed rebellion against Russia's defense ministry after a deal brokered by Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko. Yevgeny Prigozhin will leave for Belarus after initially saying he will lead his troops on the march to the capital, Moscow. The Kremlin will in return drop all charges of treason and rebellion against him and his fighters. The agreement represents a victory for Russian President Vladimir Putin after the first serious challenge to his leadership in 24 years.
Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner private military group, was cheered when his troops seized Rostov-on-Don on Friday. And he was cheered again by residents as he withdrew from the key city near the Ukrainian border just a day later. But the adulation was short-lived. Prigozhin is now banished to Belarus as Russian President Vladimir Putin prevails over his former ally. As quickly as Prigozhin summoned his forces to march on Moscow for an armed rebellion, any remnants of an attempted coup quickly petered out. Both Prigozhin and Putin say the main goal was to avoid the shedding of Russian blood, though analysts say the Wagner chief had neither the political influence nor the military might to take on Putin. Prigozhin said his forces were 200 kilometers from Moscow, where he wanted to overthrow Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and other military leaders he accused of corruption and incompetence during the Ukraine war. Roadblocks were hastily built to slow down the march. Wagner troops were to withdraw from Rostov and return to their base camps in Ukraine, where they recently played an integral part in winning the battle for the salt mining town of Bakhmut. On Friday, Putin had warned Prigozhin of harsh action should he continue with his treason. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said the events highlighted Russia's weaknesses, while US President Joe Biden was reportedly in contact with other Western leaders as Prigozhin was en route to Moscow. But in the end, Putin stood firm, and analysts debate whether the incident strengthens or weakens the Russian leaders' hold on power.
What we are seeing is a genuinely serious distraction for Russia. I think it's a temporary setback. I don't think it is the end of the world for Vladimir Putin and Russia, although we don't know.
Nazri Karim, TVB News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Wagner incident showed that the Moscow leadership is in chaos. In his nightly address shortly before Wagner's retreat, Zelensky said the bosses of Russia do not control anything. The Kremlin, he says, showed all Russian bandits, mercenaries, oligarchs that it is easy to capture Russian cities and probably arsenals with weapons. He added that the man from the Kremlin, referring to Russian President Vladimir Putin, was very afraid. This as Ukraine continues its counteroffensive in the east, which Zelensky says is making gains but slowly. The Ukrainian leader repeated his calls for allies to provide F-16 fighter jets and tactical ballistic missiles. So who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? NBC News look at how Putin's chef rose through the ranks to become the commander of the mercenary army, the Wagner Group.
A senior U.S. official tells NBC News the best way to understand what's happening now in Russia is a mafia power struggle. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a capo, a mid-level and until recently loyal soldier who has risen through the ranks by doing special tasks for his boss, President Putin. First, it was food. Prigozhin owned a chain of restaurants, including the New Haven in St. Petersburg, which Putin and his early team used as a hangout, earning him the nickname Putin's chef. Over time, he learned to cater to Putin's other needs. Most Americans know Prigozhin from the disinformation on their social media feeds. He founded a bot farm, the Internet Research Agency that, according to the Justice Department, sowed doubts about the legitimacy of the 2016 election, highlighted racial tensions in the United States, and promoted Donald Trump. In 2022, Prigozhin reinvented himself again into a commander of a mercenary army, the Wagner Group, supplementing Russian troops in Ukraine which were failing on the battlefield. He recruited thousands of convicts, promising pardons in exchange for frontline service. Thousands were sent to their deaths, and according to the few who managed to escape, they were shot if they attempted to retreat. I asked Ukraine's President Zelensky about the group earlier this month.
How do you describe Wagner and what it's doing on the ground here?
They are mercenaries and terrorists. They are just killers, he said. Prigozhin is also rich. He uses his private army to prop up dictators in Africa, in particular the president of the Central African Republic. In exchange, taking gold and blood diamonds worth $500 million a year, according to diplomats. But with money, power, and an armed force, Prigozhin has made enemies. He accuses Russia's defense minister and army chief, driven by jealousy and treason, of denying Wagner fighters ammunition. And now he wants revenge.
After one of the most dramatic days in Russia in decades, Prigozhin reportedly agreed to some sort of exile in Belarus. But why? Was it his only way to survive and keep his lucrative businesses in Africa? Or is he just biding time? It's hard to believe this murky power struggle is over.
Back in Hong Kong, starting today, the MTR will impose a fare increase at an average of 2.3%. Adjustments in fines for the illegal use of $2 concessions and fare evasion will also be implemented. Mimosa Ngai reports.
Residents must pay a higher train fare when they take the MTR from today. For instance, one traveling to and from Tsim Sha Tsui and Admiralty must pay $10.30, 20 cents more than previously. To travel between Tung Chung and Hong Kong, the journey used to cost $23.10. After the increase, passengers must pay $23.60 for the ride. According to the fare adjustment mechanism launched in 2009, the MTR can change its prices without the approval of the Legislative Council or the Executive Council. Nonetheless, fares can only be set in accordance to a fixed formula. In the past 14 years, however, MTR reduced its fares only once. With another 2.3% increase in their train fares, many residents are not happy. This woman said she now has a bigger financial burden with the increasingly expensive transport costs. This man believes the company increases its fares too often. While this lady does not think the new prices will affect her too much, it is still a burden on the public. Meanwhile, fines for the illegal use of $2 concessions and fare evasion will also be increased. The surcharge for the heavy rail network will be raised from $500 to $1,000, while the new fine for light rail and MTR buses will be adjusted to $370 from $290. Moreover, on Monday, authorities will conduct joint operations with public transport sectors to crack down on individuals who use the $2 concessions illegally. Mimosa Ngai, TVB News.
Cathay Pacific is planning to recruit cabin crew members from the mainland next month. The airline today unveiled more details about the plan, but some are worried the mainland higher salary might not be enough to cover their living expenses in Hong Kong.
Earlier, 3 Cathay Pacific cabin crew members were said to have discriminated against a passenger on a flight from the mainland to Hong Kong, allegedly for mocking the passenger's English language skills. Following the incident, promises have changed from the airline with a raft of new measures. They include the recruitment drive on the mainland next month. Cathay CEO Ronald Lam revealed the approximate number of mainland recruits.
In terms of cabin crew recruitment in Chinese mainland, as I announced earlier, we're going to start from July this year. And the target for this year is to have around 200 to 300 recruits, and then we will expand further next year.
In the past, recruitment of cabin crew up north was done mainly through Cathay's sister airline, Cathay Dragon, which was shuttered in 2020 amid the pandemic. Back then, mainland hires could stay in cabin crew bases in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou. Now they may have to station in Hong Kong under the airline's new recruitment scheme. The base salary of Cathay's cabin crew stands at $9,100. Adding up extra outport allowances and productivity pay from around 70 flight hours, their total monthly income goes up to $17,000 to $20,000 in average. Lawmaker Ben Chen, who chairs the Legislative Council's transport panel, said the remuneration might not be able to cover their living costs in Hong Kong. He said the airline also needs to consider if the mainland hires are offered accommodation and food allowances, their local counterpart might feel unfairly treated. Cathay has 132 flights a week flying between Hong Kong and mainland cities.
Amid a labor crunch, the government has lifted a ban on the importation of workers for various job types. However, Secretary for the Civil Service Ingrid JUN reiterated that no overseas talent will be brought in for civil service positions. Despite being seen as a secure job, labor losses in the civil service still reached 4.6% last year. From this month onwards, the government will allow third-year university students to apply for civil servant jobs. On whether the government would import workers for the civil service, JUN said that according to the basic law, one must be a permanent resident of Hong Kong to become a civil servant. She said the government therefore has no intention of importing labor for the civil service, adding that there's been an increase in applicants compared with previous years. Still ahead, free admission to the Hong Kong Maritime Museum on the International Day of the Seafarer. And the final day of the city's international dragon boat races. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he would set the date for a China visit at an appropriate time. He stressed the importance of bilateral trade and expressed concerns about an Australian journalist detained in Beijing. Talks are underway about a visit by Albanese to China. This as Australia pushes to end an unofficial Chinese bans and tariffs placed on some Australian products in 2020, during a low point in diplomatic ties. Albanese said Australia continued to advocate for the removal of any impediments to trade between the two countries. In May, China said it was set to resume imports of Australian timber, days after Trade Minister Don Farrell returned from a trip to Beijing. A visit by Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong in December was followed weeks later by the resumption of coal shipments. And today marks the last day of the city's Refugee Week. A series of festivities and events were held showcasing talent and diversity of asylum seekers. Let's take a look.
Flaunting this exuberance of colors, models here are not strutting down your regular runway, but between the pews of Kowloon Union Church. Bring together people from different cultures and backgrounds to spotlight talent of a community we often overlook. This fashion show is part of a series of events celebrating Refugee Week held for the second year in Hong Kong. The organizers told us the festival aims to promote cross-cultural understanding and inclusivity through arts, culture, and education, especially towards the most disenfranchised communities of refugees in Hong Kong.
Despite this being a very happy and joyous event, obviously they live in a very difficult situation, so I hope in just kind of attending events and maybe reading more about it, they also become more aware of the situation facing refugees ordinarily in Hong Kong.
We have men and women who are coming to Hong Kong to seek protection because they fear that they may suffer torture, they fear that their lives are in danger. But that is not all they are. They are human beings who have a whole multitude of interests, just like any other person.
They include Amy here, who fled wars and persecution from his home country in East Africa and has sought refuge in Hong Kong since 2004. He is grateful to be able to start a new life here despite the new challenges.
There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misinformation about refugee issues.
Also joining forces to raise awareness are the migrant workers.
We are at the domestic workers community, want also to share our talent, our skills, like what other people in the community is doing, that we can do arts also like them.
Refugee issues is no longer Hong Kong issue. It's a global issue. My hope is that, given the fact that the whole international community is being involved, I hope that life and whatever situation of refugees will be improving. And in fact, refugees, when they are given opportunity, they can contribute a lot to local societies.
This is the centerpiece of the exhibition called Our Home, created by artist Kaze, also an asylum seeker in Hong Kong. No matter if you're a refugee, a visitor to the city, or a local like me, you're welcome to paint along.
That's just as the festival's message of bringing hope beyond refugees home through everyone's efforts in Hong Kong society.
And today marks International Day of the Seafarer. The Hong Kong Maritime Museum is offering the public free admission in celebration of the event. Despite the sweltering heat, many parents and kids are in Central to participate in family activities at the Maritime Museum. Apart from guided tours, there are also opportunities to interact with youth volunteers from the Hong Kong Seamen's Union and demonstrations from the Marine Department on how to keep our oceans clean. Some parents said the experience of visiting the museum differs from that of studying in a classroom. Everything is more tangible, such as the models on display, one said. Today is the final day of the city's international dragon boat races. Many of the paddlers dressed up in costumes, including mahjong shirts, to compete in a special race.
You know, mahjong is popular all over the world. It's probably most popular in Hong Kong, so we thought it's very appropriate for today. We all play mahjong every night. Mahjong is all about creating harmony out of chaos. All right, and that's what we're trying to do today.
In the afternoon, the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area Championship was held for the first time at the event. Winners of the championship and 4 other major races were awarded $10,000 each, with Chief Executive John Lee presenting the awards. And that's the news. Thank you for watching.